Hi and welcome to Magic Numbers. This is episode number 154, and we're going to be talking about evaluating cards and what data can tell us about card evaluation and how you can use the data insights to at least get better in predicting what might be good and what might be terrible. Before we go into that, thanks to my patrons, I don't have any new ones to report. However, I've been informed by Patreon that now I have 100 free members in my Patreon. And free members are allegedly good. So if you don't feel like sponsoring me or you're not in condition to do so, join as a free patron and get my updates. And over time, who knows? And also thanks to mtgazone.com and Bulkbox for sponsoring me. And watch that space in the future. Hopefully, I will have some announcements coming. Let's see. Before we move to the main topic, we are going to do a preamble, which is shockingly also about the main topic. I think that there's plenty of problems with card evaluation in previous season, and it's weird that this is most of the time the most followed content by any content creator, because it's probably also the most wrong content that any content creator puts out. Nothing to do with the quality of content creators, me included. However, predicting the future is really hard, and figuring out the context of the set based on only the card composition without ever touching the cards is also very hard. So the issue is that you need to predict both the card's power and the set context. And some cards are quite powerful but never make it because the color was just not good enough in the particular set. And because the color was not good enough, the card was paying the price for that. And sometimes you will see some very mediocre card that actually have a quite high win rate because they are piggyback riding on the power of other cards in the same color or color combination. And it's really hard to predict both the power of the card and the set's context based on the list of the cards that are in the set. We are all struggling with it, and it's almost impossible to get everything right before touching the card, because so much of what happens is going to be determined not only, for example, not only by the sheer power of the colors or the cards. Sometimes there are other factors that are in play. For example, in Phyrexia OB1, red and green were the powerful color combination, in large part because lots of people were just trying to force poison decks, which were not powerful at all. But a lot of people were just drafting those poison decks. And because of that, 17 lens users who are intimately close with the data and understand what's going on in the format had an open lane for those powerful green-red decks for a very, very long time in the season. And that didn't really correct during the duration, because people were chasing the dream of killing someone with poison counters instead of focusing on winning. And sometimes it will happen. And how can you predict that kind of psychological effect of poison mechanic being present in the set? And there are dozens of other examples where that situation has happened. So at least I would recommend you, whenever you're thinking about the set, don't look only at the card power in vacuum, because that will not bring you to good conclusions in plenty of situations. This is one of the reasons why I don't do set review and traditional format looking at individual cards. Our set review, the draft skeleton stream, is looking at decks, because decks will have to take into account not only what power is in individual cards, but also we'll try to look at what synergies can you unlock, which color combinations can do what, and which alignments of cards will be most successful according to us. It's still not going to be perfect, but I think that it adds this additional context level to the set review that looking at individual cards might miss, because you cannot just talk about a single card and say, hey, here we have this new version of Shock, and whatever happens after is usually, well, I'm going to give it like a C+, because I think it's a C+. You can't just talk, okay, it's good because it works with this card that I still didn't talk about. It's good with that card that I still didn't talk about. And it's going to be great against this particular common from another color that I also did not talk about because it would ruin the whole structure of the set review. However, if you do it deck-centric, you introduce the cards as you speak. They will be shared by different archetypes, and you can talk about them and add this context at the same time. So I strongly recommend looking at draft skeletons yourself and trying to build some as an exercise before the set hits the arena to figure out what you think might be working. And building those decks can actually open your eyes to some kind of card interactions that you might find useful in the early days. Okay, but we're going to be talking about the set evaluation, not based on Final Fantasy, because it's still not fully spoiled, but based on the previous sets and seeing which cards overperformed, underperformed, what predictions were correct, what predictions were not correct. And I'm going to tap into a variety of data, including 17 lens, but not only. I'm going to actually look at data from Twitter users and followers of one of my favorite data-centric content creators, MTG Data Science. And we're going to look at some of their pack 0, pick 1 data from across the time. And they were very kind to provide me with the ready data that I could analyze. So that's going to be fun. I'm also going to look at the card power across multiple sets. And when I do that, I always use my across set comparison data set, which I prepared myself from the 17 lens data. The problem is that you cannot really compare win rates from one set and win rates from another set because those sets will have different average win rate. So as you can see here, if one set has 52% win rate on average and another set has 58% win rate on average, then if I look at the middle of the range card from the 58% win rate set, I'm going to be comparing it with one of the best cards in the 52% win rate average win rate set. And that will lead me to absolutely wrong conclusions. Obviously, the differences between sets and 17 lens users data across sets are not that big, but they're still quite sizable. There can be 54% win rate sets and there can be 56% win rate sets. And this will still lead us to some sort of difference where an average card in one of those sets is going to be way above average in the other one. So to combat that issue, what I'm doing is a very simple mathematical trick. I'm just going to move those distributions to the same spot and make them average on 50%. And when all of the sets are aligned with an average of 50%, then I can start comparing them. And to make it easier for people to parse, I also assigned a useful letter grade scale to every range of the win rate. So for example, cards that have over the 60% of this normalized win rate, these will be the A pluses. And I base those brackets on previous results from multiple sets just to make sure that it sort of fits the distribution. Then, like 57 to 60 will be A's, 55 to 57 A minuses, and so on and so on. Something around 50% is going to be a C, and things below 42% is going to be an F. And there are, of course, all the other kind of brackets that I added. So all the letter grades that normally are used during the set review are covered by my scale. Since Midnight Hunt, based on all the sets, this is how the distribution of the grades looks like when you apply my scale. So there's like under percent of the cards are A pluses, and then there's going to be like 2% of A's, 3% of A minuses, 3% of B pluses, 6% of B's, 8% of B minuses, 10% of C pluses, and then like 16% of C minuses, 12.5% of D pluses and D's, and then 7% are going to be D minuses, and 3% are going to be F's. And I think that this is a reasonable division across this distribution. I've done it a long time ago, and new sets didn't add much to how the distribution looks like. It shifts a bit over time, but it stays roughly the same with the most common grade being usually C minus. How it is distributed by rarity. And here we see one interesting thing is that, first of all, commons are going to be very focused between C and D. And if you add up the numbers, it's roughly 75% of all the commons are between the C and D range, which means that if you're evaluating commons, your default should be Okay, it's a C minus. Is it better than C minus? If it's better than C minus, probably it's a C. And then few of them will be C plus, and then very small percentages are going to be like B, B minus. These are exceptional commons. Is it a bit weaker than the C minus? It's probably going to be somewhere in the D plus D range, because that's most likely. It's just pure probabilistics. Uncommons. And by the way, this shows like the quality of how the design team works, because if almost all commons are fit in that kind of narrower range, that means that cards are designed according to their rarity. Uncommons are going to be, there are already going to be some uncommons that are A minuses according to my grade, but there's going to be very few of them. It's just a percentage of the uncommons, and B plus is also quite rare. But then we have like more Bs, B minuses. These are more common in uncommon slots, and then still the most popular are the C to C, C to D kind of ranges with this. Zoiks, that's an interesting thing, and I didn't put it in the seminar, but I actually did the analysis of. So the question is, the distribution with new set boosters. You mean your new play boosters is looking the same as those from before? It does look slightly different. I did a thread in on Twitter and Blue Skies last week when I showed that there is fewer commons that are D minuses and Fs in general in the set boosters. So as promised by the design team, they trimmed down on the least powerful commons in the set and focused on the more powerful ones. There is an increase of Cs and C minuses, basically. That's the difference between the old boosters and the play boosters. But interesting part starts when you look at the rares and mythics. They are very evenly distributed across every single grade. Now, of course, there's going to be fewer A pluses, just because A plus it's super rare that something is an A plus. There's been 20 something of them across all the sets that I looked at, and these are all the sets since Midnight Hunt, which is quite a lot. But outside of the A pluses, they are relatively evenly distributed across. There is like 100, 150 of each grade across the set. This, of course, makes it much more hard to predict how good a rare or a mythic is, judging just by the rarity, because they do tend to have all kinds of possible ranges and outcomes. And this is devilishly hard to predict how powerful a rare is, because small things make large differences. Yeah, this is the same graph, but just sort of shows you what percentage of each rarity is in which bracket, and you can see, like 20% of all commons are in the C range, 20% of all commons are in the C minus range, and then 16-17% of all the commons are D plus D range. This is basically the same graph, but just spread across. But for example, if you look at this distribution, there's this sharp distribution of commons with the peak at C, C minus. There's this mellower distribution of uncommons, again with the peak at C minus. But the mythics, for example, peak at A minus, and then there's a small decline of how many, what percentage of mythics is in the lower grades. Rares have a super wide distribution. You can't even say where the peak is. Probably should be somewhere at C plus, but weirdly there is very few C plus rares compared to Bs or Cs. Possibly because it's hard for them to hit that kind of sweet spot. It's also very few commons are Fs, and especially with the play boosters, fewer and fewer commons are in the F grade. So if you're looking for the Fs, 5% of rares and mythics are around F grade, but only 1% of commons. So that's something to look at. So yeah, commons live in a narrow range. 75% of them is between C and D, while uncommons are a bit harder to predict already. 55% of them are still between C and D, but a third of all the uncommons are above C plus. With commons, it's only 7.5% that are above C plus. So big difference in terms of where will you find your Bs. And then, yeah, as I said, rares and mythics span the whole range of possible outcomes quite well. So it will be even harder to predict them. So what does make a great common? Because I think that for early days, if you want to get the edge in the early format, getting the commons right and figuring out which color has the most powerful commons is going to help you quite a lot finding your early footing. And here I have listed I think 25 of the best commons of the last 3 years or so. And well, first of all, you can see that 2 of them were extreme outliers. By the way, just for the methodological notes, I excluded the MH3 and Lord of the Rings sets from this analysis because I wanted to focus on standard sets only. If I would include MH3, there would be one more here in the top 25 commons, and that would be Withering Chrysalis, which would be somewhere insanely high. It was the only common that actually went into the A minus range, which is just ridiculous when you think about it. But Inspiring Overseer and Preening Champion, 3 mana, 2 powered flyers, both of them were head and shoulders above every other common in the last 3 years. Inspiring Overseer was a 2/1 flyer, ETB, draw a card and gain 1 life. Preening Champion is a 3 mana 2/2 flyer, and when it ETBs, you have a 1/1 ground creature on top of it. So yeah, so these are above everything else by quite a lot. The normalized win rate for those is 55.8 and 55.3. And then the third best common, Organ Hoarder, 53.5. So 2 percentage points difference between the top 2 and the third one. And that's a huge gap. Just to give you the impression, 53.5 is the Organ Hoarder. 25th best common, Waterwind Scout, is 52.8. So there is, well, something like 0.7 percentage points difference between the third and 25th. And there is 2 percentage point difference between the third and sort of average of the first and the second. So yeah, absolute outliers. And both of those, well, there was a combination of many things. They were in a good color. They were powerful. They did exactly what you want to be doing in the particular set. Evasion was good in those sets, and it all added up to being great commons. You can see Waterwind Scout, which is actually a similar card to Preening Champion, was much lower than that. That was the 2/2 flyer that makes a map. Of course, map is not as good as a creature, but it's a 2/2 flyer that makes additional pieces of cardboard, and not as good. It's still great, but not as good as Preening Champion, for example. And when you look at the top commons, Organ Hoarder, a creature that draws a card; Inspiring Overseer, a creature that draws a card; Preening Champion, a creature that creates extra value; Jewel Thief, a creature that also creates extra value because it makes a treasure, and it's actually on really good rate. That's a 3 mana 3/3 vigilance trample, and makes a treasure when it enters. Lunar Veteran, that's 1-drop that generates value over the game. So first 5 commons are just creatures that make value while being also decent on rate. Then we have Deadly Derision, that's the removal spell. Kills something and makes a treasure, so also a removal, but also adds some value. And then we have a whole package of things from Blue-Black deck and Midnight Hunt. There is Revenge of the Drowned there, Falcon Abomination, Diagraph Horde, Ecstatic Awakener, what else? Flip the Switch is in there. So there's like 7 cards from Midnight Hunt, and most of them are in the blue-black kind of part of the Midnight Hunt. So it is just a package deal where all of those cards were working very synergistically in this one particular deck that you could build based on commons, and you could, in the first weeks, force it freely, and it had sick win rate at that time. So sometimes you will get really good cards because they come as a package. They're super synergistic, super easy to get, and super important. But then when we look at it, we continue with like Okiba Reckoner Ray. That's another value engine. It was the saga from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty that makes a 2/2 with Menace and then drains some life. Throw from the Saddle, the very efficient removal from OTJ. That was also the key part of the most powerful week 1 deck in that format, which was the green-white mounts. Raffine's Informant, that card was good, but also was helped by the fact that it was often played together with Inspiring Overseer, and it's always a good one to hit when you drop the Informant on 2 and it's Overseer on 3. Contagious Vorak, that's same kind of level as Jewel Thief, a 3-mana 3/3 that gives you some value. In this case, it gets you a land. Saver, super efficient removal, but it also makes an additional piece of cardboard by making a food token. And you see that removal, you have the Deadly Derision, that makes a treasure. Throw from the Saddle, that makes a +1/+1 counter in many cases. Saver, that makes a food. You also get Towards the Tower and Hex Gold Slash, which are super efficient in the format where super efficient cheap removal was actually quite useful. And Makeshift Binding, that is an Oblivion Ring that gains you some life. So all of the removal that made that list of the top commons in the last 3 years, it had something extra that it's doing. It doesn't mean that every removal that has something extra will be great, but it means that for a removal to be great, it probably should provide something extra. So that's something for you to keep in mind. And then, we have another creature that draws a card, Sipsik Appraiser, in the same range as Organ Hoarder. We have Oltec Cloud Guard, another thing that makes a 1/1 token. Flip the Switch was a part of that package. And Waterwind Scout, another flyer that makes an additional piece of cardboard. So generally, the theme of those top commons is things that are either super efficient or make extra value, or make an additional piece of cardboard. And that's the general theme that we're looking for when looking at absolutely greatest commons of the recent years. It also is very format dependent what is going on. So for example, I looked at my grade and I looked at the commons that are B- or higher in their grade, and this is going to be the theme, most the analysis I'm going to look at. Oh yeah, by the way, I forgot, someone mentioned in the chat, but there was one comment that I didn't mention, and it would be a shame not to mention it. Imperial Oath. This is the 6 mana, make 3 2/2s with Vigilance and Scry 3. And that card was just, you chained it time and time after again in Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. This is like 3/1, potentially 4/1, because you got 3 bodies, and Scry 3 will usually count as almost like netting you a card because you are not going to draw something that you don't need. And this is the kind of level that you need to reach for a 6 mana card to be a great common. As you can see, like, we have a bunch of 3s, maybe a couple of 4s in there, a bunch of 1s, but there's only one 5 mana card, Diagraph Horde, a 3/4 that makes 2 2/2s, and Imperial Oath as a 6-drop makes 3 2/2s. It really needs to produce a lot of material for a 6-drop to be good, because the problem with the 6-drops, that often you play them, they do something, maybe like, I don't know, gain you 2 life, whatever, you get hit by the removal and you're left with the 2 life, and you spend 6 mana. And of course it costs them a card, so a card neutral, but probably it's mana it's mana negative for you. It's not possible to deal with an Imperial Oath in that such an easy way. Yes, they can have a removal. Okay, they kill one of the 2/2s, you're left with 2 other 2/2s, and you get your Scry. So it's very difficult to undo the damage that this card has done. And Diagraph Horde was very similar. because it also exiled cards from the graveyards, and that was a very graveyard-centric set. So you sort of cast it as a 5-drop that is a 3/4, and you makes those 2 decayed 2/2s, and at the same time it sort of duresses their graveyard because they will lose access to a spell that was there ready to be cast. And so yeah, next analysis, I looked at the number of commons with the grade of B- or higher according to my grading scale, and trying to see how many commons of that grade are there per set. And you can see there is a big range of that, how many commons are fitting in that range. So for example, Phyrexia Obi-Wan had 12 commons that fulfill that criterion. Foundations, Midnight Hunt, 11 each. Mom and so March of the Machine and Streets of New Capenna, 10. But then we go to the other side of the spectrum, and Duskmoor only had 1 common that made a B-. Timur Tarkir Dragonstorm, only 4. Wilds of Eldraine, 5. MKM, 5. And if you look at this from chronological point of view, there is plenty of sets that are play booster sets that are on the bottom end of the spectrum. Duskmoor, Tarkir Dragonstorm, Murders at Karlov Manor, OTJ, Ether Drift, Bloomborough. These are all like 6, 5 B-level commons. So B-level commons are not that popular in the recently created sets. Exception from that rule is Foundation, and in my opinion, March of the Machine, which technically is not a play booster set, but it was sort of the play booster set. The structure of the March of the Machine pack was very similar to the play booster pack, and I think that never got the confirmation for that, but I have the strong feeling that March of the Machine was a beta test for play boosters. So if you were evaluating the current set, I would say quite unlikely that there's going to be many B-level commons. Keep that in mind because of how the common design has changed for the play boosters. Then I thought, you know what? I can do a bit more with that B- or higher grade at each rarity. So what I decided to do is to look at the cards with the B- or higher grade and try to compare what percentage of something is in all the cards that I look at in those sets, and what percentage of something is there only in the B- cards for the set. And the first thing I looked at creature and non-creature spells. It's a very generic category, and some non-creature spells will make a creature. I didn't dig that deep into that. I just decided to arbitrarily say that if it is a creature, either artifact creature or enchantment creature or just a creature, or it doesn't have the creature part in their type, I'm going to split them into 2 categories. And then I looked at each rarity level, and I tried to compare how many creatures and non-creatures are there in general, and how many creatures and non-creatures are there at the B- or higher grade based on this analysis that I did for every set. And first of all, when you look at all cards, it's a relatively even split. At any rarity, you have around 45 to 48% non-creatures and around 50 to 53% creature spells. So you would expect the same kind of structure being there for the B- or better, but it's not. Yes, at common, you have 48% non-creature spell and 52% creatures. So this is the split that you would expect from what we have in all cards. But if we move to higher rarities, despite numbers being the same, roughly 45, 47 to 52 for 53, you have completely different splits of non-creatures and creatures at the B-. So for example, uncommons, only 36% of the uncommons of the B- or better uncommons are non-creature spells, and 64% are creature spells. So big shift towards creatures. So despite printing a lot of non-creature spells, there are few really great limited non-creature spells that will have a win rate at a B or higher. And it's even worse for the rares. 54% of all the rares were non-creatures, and only 46% were creatures. but 75% of all the B minus or better rares were creatures. So despite only being 45% of the cards, they take up 75% of B minus or better, which means that a lot of rare spells suck in limited, or at least are not great. So make sure that you're careful, because they might be looking interesting, but I think that there's a good chance that those rare spells are too situational. They require maybe deck building that is only available in constructed, and they don't play as well as you might think that they are. So lots of non-creature spells at higher rarity might be traps, and it's actually common spells that probably do a better job in being key for the limited decks. And yeah, same with mythics. There's also like a 34 to 65 split between non-creatures and creatures, even though they are almost 50-50 when you look at all cards. Okay, so since I answered the question whether non-creatures or creature spells are more impactful in limited, I decided to look at some other things. And for example, I decided to look at, are there any general trends based on the color of the spell? And here I divided the colors into each of the Wuber colors. Multicolored spells I clustered together, and colorless spells I clustered together. And also I separated those by creatures and non-creatures because I was just curious. There was no like hypothesis driving me. I just wanted to see what's going on in there. Colors seems to do matter. I looked at what fraction of the um, of commons in a given color are B minus or better. And when I look at the white creatures, for example, 15% of white creatures were B minus or better across the sets that I analyzed. And 12% of the non-creature white spells were B minus or better. Compare that to green, where only 2.8% of the creatures were B minus or better, and only 2.6% non-creature green spells were B minus or better. This is a night and day difference. It's more like 4 or 5 times more likely that a white card is going to be B minus or better at common than it would happen in green. What else can we see? Blue had 10% both for creatures and non-creatures at B minus or better. So pretty well balanced color all through those sets. And black, for example, is weird in a way that only 5% of black creatures were B minuses or better, but 12% of spells were B minuses or better. And this indicates that black is the removal color, and WotC knows it sort of. I mean, knows they better know it. They designed those cards to sort of account for the fact that this is the removal color and there will be good spells. They make the creatures slightly weaker, and I think that it's a net negative for black, because when you look at it, you still see that 12%, 11.5% of all the white and blue non-creature spells are Bs, which is comparable to the numbers of black, but they have much stronger creatures. That at least they will have some really strong creatures among them. And blue generally, I think, also suffers from low creature quality problem, but blue will have some really exceptional flyers, and that will drag those numbers up. While the end of the barrel kind of blue creatures distribution is going to be pretty bad. While white is just generally has solid creatures, but also solid spells. Now, of course, the question remains, are those solid spells in white solid because they are dragged up by good creature base? And if you would improve black creatures, black would skyrocket with all those numbers, and 20% of the black non-creature spells would be B minus or more if you would make 10% of the black creatures into B minuses. But I think that still the disproportion is pretty bad, and the fact that black gets time after time after time substandard creatures is problematic. And you have the same kind of trend with red, but only 3% of the red creatures were B minus or more, and 7.5% non-creature spells in red were B minus or more. And it's a very different situation with the multicolor common creatures. 10% of them were at B minus or better, but only 2% of the non-creature spells in multicolor were actually useful. And colorless is the least represented here. Only 2% of colorless spells are creature spells are B minus or more, and only 2.7% non-creatures colorless spells are in this criterion. But when you think about it, colorless spells are weakened on purpose. If they will be too strong, everyone can have them. Everyone can put them in the deck. So if they would be too strong, that would be a problem. And when you think about it from that aspect, how bad it is that green is basically at the same level as colorless, how bad it is that only 2.8% of the green common creatures will get to the B minus range, while for white it's 15.6, like 5 times more. Did I count correctly? Yes, I think I counted correctly. 5 times more. So it's 5 times more likely that a white card will be a B minus or more than a green card at common level. And I don't think that it's right. I think that there should be some revamp of thinking of how you design green commons to make them actually competitive. Because green, I don't even remember how many times during my stream I said, or how many times did Alex say during his podcast, oh yeah, but green is a color that exists at the uncommon level. And it's true. And this data sort of shows it. Commons and green just don't pull their weight. And because of that, you need to rely on the uncommons. But of course, the problem with the uncommons is that each uncommon is opened only once per pod. So the odds are that you're going to go into green hoping to get those fabled uncommons, but you won't just get them because they won't be opened in your pool. And what do you do then? You play with mediocre C plus, C minus creatures. When you look at the uncommons, it looks slightly different. I mean, white is still doing very well. Like around 25% of the white common creatures and non-creatures at uncommon are B minuses or better. So significant increase from the commons. Blue still 23% of the creatures and 17% of the non-creatures are Bs. So that's again comparable with the previous one. Green does much better. 25% of the green uncommon creatures are actually Bs. And 18.2% are of the non-creatures in green are also B minus or higher. Red looks pretty poor at uncommon with only 13% of the creatures and 15% of the spells being B minus or higher, and black similar, 18 versus 15. And color is still weak, but 12% of the colorless creatures are actually in the B zone. But only 3% of the non-creature artifacts most of the time that are in this criteria. So still the colorless spells lag behind. But what was interesting is this multicolor creatures. And when we talk about multicolor uncommon creatures, mainly we think about the signpost uncommons. And 35% of the signpost creature uncommons are B minus or higher, and the non-creature ones, 28%. So definitely multicolor is where power is being locked. And those two colors that you need to spend, of course, limit where you can play it. But because of that, you get them slightly later. Because of that, they can put more power into the text box, and it transfers into higher win rates and being a B more frequently than the others. Emodane's Recruiter will count as a multicolor card in this analysis. But again, I mean, those things will change very little how the thing plays out. It's golden rule, because I had to use some kind of arbitrary data. Obviously, I took whatever it says in the text box of color in 17 lens data. That's it. I didn't do any secondary corrections based on arbitrary things. So I think weirdly, Emodane's Recruiter will be white-red, but the white dragon that has a red spell, not, because it's not counting as a white red card on 17 lands. I don't know why, but that's what it was. When you look at the rares, here you already see the domination of the creatures. Around 60% of colored creatures at rare will be B- or more. 60 for white, 55 for blue, 60 for black, 50 for red, and 73 for green. This is where green also has like a lot of power. A lot of green rare creatures are just B- or higher. And with spells, same thing, but the numbers are significantly lower. It's around 33% for each color. So 36 for white, 33 for blue, 25 for black, 33 for red, 33 for green. So roughly a third of non-creature spells are on this B- or higher level, and 66 are below that. Ta-da! Also, multicolor rares, not as powerful as the multicolor uncommons. Here, it seems to me like the WotC tried to put as many of those kind of constructed, planned, or weird commander build around uncommon, earthful, rare multicolor creatures. Only 43% of the rare multicolor creatures were B or above, and only 15% of multicolor spells at rare were B- or above, and then colorless again, 16.7 and 11% for the creatures and non-creatures respectively. So they definitely don't want to push the colorless things in limited. And last thing with mythics, mythic spells seem to be slightly better than the rare spells. So here you will get more closer to the 50-60% range for non-creature spells at B- or higher. Yeah, somehow. Yeah, Seeker, you're absolutely right. Colorless creature spells have 100% of them are at the B- or better, and mythic. That's just because there's so few colorless mythic creatures. There's, I think, sample size was 3 or 4, and they were all B-, and that just comes up with those numbers. But for the rest of them, you will get decent sample sizes. So I don't know, like rare creatures in red, probably there's 100 of them or so when we look at it. So we're looking at some sizable numbers. However, yeah, with colorless or with one drops, there can be small sample sizes there, and we're going to look at one drops in a second. And still, there is an advantage of creatures versus non-creatures at Mythic, but it's much smaller than when we look at rares. And yeah, generally, those rare non-creature spells seem to there seems to be something wrong with them for the limited in the way that they're probably not designed in large numbers. They're not designed for limited at all. Okay, then I thought, once I did the colors, why don't I do the mana value? Where do we find more power? At which mana value? So first of all, let's start with the common. I again divided it into multiple categories. There are the commons, food. There are the commons, and then for each rarity, I will have the same graph, and the values are mana value 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 or more. And 15% of all the one drops at common printed in the last 3 years were B- or higher. So there's definitely power in those one drops. And people talk about how WotC prints busted one drops. This finds confirmation in the data. It seems like there is plenty of powerful one drops. Spells, only 5.7% of the common non-creature spells will be B- or higher. And for all the other rarities, there's more actually non-creature spells than creature spells that are B or higher, and that probably is linked to the efficient removal. 6.5% of creatures at mana value 2 are B-, but 10% or almost 11% of non-creatures are. 7 versus 9.6 at 3 mana value. 8 versus 13% of the 4 mana non-creature spells were B- or higher in the last 3 years. Then at 5, you have 5% of creature and 2% of non-creatures. And at 6 or more mana value, only 2.9% of creatures, but 9% of spells. So there is plenty of busted spells that costed 6 or more at common, printed in the last years. So spells that cost more than 6, if they have decent effect, I think that they're worth looking at. And it's easy to understand why. If you cast a creature that costs 6 mana and it gets killed, a lot of the time opponent's going to be ahead on mana. If you cast a spell that is costing 6 mana, usually it has like a decently sized effect, and that effect will stay unless it gets countered, which you hopefully will play in such a way that it won't. But unless it gets countered, you're going to get 6 mana value of stuff, and it's hard for the opponent to undo something because it can be like, I don't know, a removal or whatever, Imperial Oath. There's plenty of value done, and that spell is done, resolved, and there's nothing you can do about it. So looking at those expensive non-creature spells is something I would recommend when you're evaluating the set, because a lot of the time those will be quite decent. For the uncommons, still 27% of the 1-drops at uncommon or 1-drop creatures are B- or higher. Only 13.5% of the non-creature spells. So it's twice more likely that a creature will be a B or higher than a non-creature at 1 mana. At 2, it's even more egregious. Almost 37% of the uncommon 2-drop creatures were B- or higher. So quite a good chance that they print 2-drop at uncommon. Quite a good chance it's going to be good. And only 22% of the non-creature spells for 2 mana. At 3, we have 24 versus 23. So not very small difference between creature and non-creature. But also like not that many cards at that mana value are amazing. Still some, 24, 23% is decent. Because when we go to the 4, only 12 and 16% respectively of creatures and non-creatures are the B or more. So a bunch of those 4-drops that uncommon are just poor, because you can't cast them early. They cannot have too much power because they only cost 4 mana. Creatures will, often be on the rate, and if creature is good on rate, it means that any removal that kills it is probably take away all the value that the card was bringing. So I see that in the chat people are mentioning some like classic uncommon 2-drops, like Traveling Botanist, a great example, Deep Cavern Bat. A bunch of those powerful signposts in recent years, like, I don't know, Miriam or the Rakdos Hasty Ping Max Speed guy, whatever its name was. All those 2-drops were quite powerful and quite pushed. What kind of good 4-drop at uncommon can you mention from the last couple of years? I mean, I'm sure that there are some. I just like they don't roll from the top of the tongue. And because they're uncommons, usually you have to fight for them, and the more expensive ones are going to be more appealing to the beginner players. And beginner players are the players that fill the arena draft queues. So you also will need to prioritize those 4 mana uncommons highly. And because of that, you might miss out on other cards. And because of that, you will end up having a weaker deck. And it's a self-fulfilling processing that if they are in weaker decks, they are not going to be B- most of the time. And the same with the 5-drops. 19% of the 5-drops creatures were Bs, and only 11% of the 5-drop spells at uncommon were Bs. And then we go to 6 or more casting things, and we got 20 and 22% of the cards as creatures and non-creature spells. So a decent amount, but it sort of shows this U-shaped kind of curve when you peak at 2 and you sort of dip and then you recover, because those super expensive things, especially again the non-creature spells at the higher value are slightly more popular. And I'm quite confident that it's because spells deliver value and are you cannot kill them after they've been casted. They've been cast, and that's it. At rares, we see that independently of the mana value, roughly 55% of the creatures are going to be B minus or higher. It's uncanny how evenly distributed that is. Like 59.3 of 1 drops, 49 of 2 drops, 53 of 3 drops, 51 of 4 drops, 54 of 5 drops, and 60% of 6 pluses. So yeah, that's quite cool to see. And then at the non-creature spells, 1 and 2 mana non-creature spells at rare, not that great, with 16 to 22%. And then it increases, like 4 mana rares, and 40% of them were Bs, and then 5 mana, 37%, and 6 mana, 37%. So it sort of plateaus at mana values of 4 or more, at this 37% of them being B minuses. So there are some spells, but you probably want to err on the sides of more expensive ones. And when you look at the mythics, again, it is relatively even at 50, 60% of all the mythics creatures are roughly B minus or higher, with an exception of 5 drops. And I can imagine my chat telling me, hey, but that's just a small sample size. How many 5-drop mythic creatures do you have in the data set? That they have 86-7% of them are B minuses. Well, the answer is there's around 100 of them. So there's, I think, 97 of mythic 5-drop creatures in the data set that I looked at. But yeah, 85 of those 97s are B minus or higher. So that's quite telling. There's a plenty of, if it's a mythic and it's a 5-drop, almost a guarantee it's good. As the non-creature spells go, the cheap ones at rare and mythic, at both rare and mythic, they seem to underperform. So cheap, rare, mythic non-creature spells, be cautious about them when you evaluate them, because historically they're not as strong. But when we go to 3 mana or more, we go to the 50%, 60% kind of range of how many of those are Bs and B minuses. While at 1 drops are 14%, 2 drops 30%. So yeah, cheap mythics, cheap rare spells, potentially not great. At least be careful with evaluating those super optimistically. Okay, that's one thing. We can look at historical performance of the cards, but I wanted to do something more. I wanted to see how people predict cards. But it's very, of course, hard to see how people predict cards, because I would have to go into all the set reviews of content creators and evaluate them. And that's, of course, possible, but of course, it would make me many enemies if I start bashing other content creators for their half-cooked set reviews. So instead of that, I decided to go to a big data for card evaluation, and I smiled to MTG_DS on Twitter and MTGDS without the underscore on Blue Sky. So Magic the Gathering Data Science. It's a great account that has some amazing analyses. I personally swiped some of the nice looking graphs from them before, with permission, of course, because I think that, for example, they have one of the best way of showing the depth of the color, and it's fantastic, and I highly recommend following them. What they do, every set, before the set is released, they make a form that I highly encourage you to actually fill in for every set. I also learned that there was supposed not to be one for Final Fantasy, but hopefully my interest has helped that thing to reappear for this set as well. And they ask people to fill in this form with best common for each color. Then you have 2 wildcard commons, and best signpost and common according to you. And you have to fill it in before the set is released, before you get the 17 last data. And then it sort of evaluates all the picks that you've made based on the win rates from 17 lands, and the person with the most cumulative win rate is winning the best predictor kind of virtual award. So yeah, as I said, pick one common of each color, 2 wild cards, and one multicolor uncommon. And then the player with the highest sum of game and hand win rate wins. And I wanted to test, okay, so how does the wisdom of the crowd work? If many people pick a card, does it perform better than if few people predict the card is good? So can we trust the wisdom of the crowd? And here's the first graph that shows you how many people selected the card and what was its rank in its color. And rank, obviously, 1 is the best. So this was the top card in its color, or top multicolor card in the set. And like you go to 15, that was the 15th best. So that's unlikely. This is for commons only, this graph, by the way. And you can see that when there were cards that few people selected, like between 1 and 20, we have a whole range of cards in there. So we have the worst card, we have the medium card, we have some of the best cards that were selected by few people. But if we go to like over 100 people selecting a card, these cards will rarely be not so great. So if you look at the results of the Pack 0 Pick 1 analysis from the Magic MTGDS, if multiple people pick the card, it's pretty likely that this is going to be a top 3 common in its color, because there is no precedent that it's not been. But of course, here we have some cards that are sort of weird, that enough people selected them that you would expect that they would do better, but they did not. So here we have a card that was selected by 40 people, but it was the 11th best common in its color. So I thought, okay, some cards were tempting for people to select, but they didn't deliver. And I looked at the 5 cards that were the biggest outliers. They were very low rank in their color, and yet they were selected by many people. And there were 3 commons and 2 uncommons on that list. So first we have Skullduggery. It's from OTJ. Black for an instant. Until end of turn, target creature you control gets +1/+1, and target creature an opponent controls gets -1/-1. And this card was widely predicted to be decent because there was a crime synergy in the set. It was a card that existed before and was good in its format before. And it completely didn't deliver. It just didn't align very well with what the sizing of the creatures were in that particular set. Another card that we have, and by the way, a reprint. This is an important part of it. People had a prior knowledge of how that card actually worked, and they used that prior knowledge, but from a very different context, to apply to a new set and assume that it's going to work like that. Tolarian Terror. I have to admit, I did select Tolarian Terror myself, so I'm one of the 60 or whatever 50 people that selected that particular card because it was great in Dominaria United, but it was not great in Foundations. It just didn't do what the set was about. There was a lot of flyers that the Tolarian Terror was not doing anything about. The spells were not as great as in Dominaria United and didn't align very well with the Tolarian Terror game plan. And it all added up to that card not being so great. And yeah, this is a trap I fell. I evaluated it based on Dominaria United, and I assumed that evaluation is going to stick. And this shows you just how context changes the power of the card. Skullduggery, whichever Ixalan it was in, I think it was an Ixalan of some sorts, before my time. Tolerant Terror, Dominaria United, great card in there, but you move it to a different context, it all of a sudden does poorly. Some card that you will see performing very differently from set to set is going to be Murder. Some sets Murder is great, some sets Murder is decent, and some sets Murder is just unplayable. And this shows that the card is not at all uh, um, determining its power. It's the context that can completely create the context for that card. And then the third card that was on that list is Leonin Surveyor. This is not a reprint, but most people assume that start your engine, speed racing kind of set is going to be all about aggression and two drop that is aggressively statted but generates some value later in the game. First strike being annoying. They assume that Leonin Surveyor is going to be great. Gladly, I didn't fell into that trap. I just picked Ride's End, and I was right. But a bunch of people did pick a Leonin Surveyor, and to their detriment. So just think about not only card in the vacuum as you would with Leonin Surveyor, but also try to establish what is the speed of the format going to be. And it's not easy, and it's very hard, especially when your default is, okay, it's probably going to be fast. But sometimes the defaults don't work. As for the uncommons, two uncommons I selected was Lagorin, Soul of Alacria, green and white for a 1/1 flyer, and when it attacks while saddled, you put 2+1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target mounts and or vehicles. And then it was a bit of a failure of the deck it was in, but also the card itself was not that amazing, because the other green-white signpost in that set, veteran something, 3/4 that untapped your creatures every turn and also could pump the team, was actually really good. And the another card, Seedglaive Mentor, the 1 red white for a 3/2 mouse soldier, vigilance haste, valiant. Whenever Seedglaive Mentor becomes the target of a spell or ability you control for the first time each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And it offers this dream of, I cast it, it attacks, next turn I play some kind of a combat trick on it, and it becomes a 4/3 plus whatever the combat trick gave it, and I take over the game and then just take over the game from there. The reality was that often people couldn't cast it on turn 3 because it couldn't attack or it couldn't block. Both most of the time, because the opponent cast their 2-drop, which was too powered. So Seedglaive Mentor couldn't be cast on this turn 3. Then on turn 4, you could cast it if you had maybe a 1-mana combat trick, but there were not many of those. So when do you cast that card? Turn 5, 6? Also, even if you do that then, and you cast it for 5, attack, they block on a 2-drop, you cast your spell, haha, and then you got savored in response and it just dies. So it just didn't align very well. And despite looking amazing, it just couldn't really find a good sort of spot for solid attacks. Now, this card arguably did work very well with things like Blacksmith Talent, and some people managed to make their deck solid around that. And it was not always a 0, but I think that by now you should know that whenever I talk about cards, it's not absolutes. The fact that Seedglaive Mentor was underperformed compared to the other signposts in the set doesn't mean that it was an unplayable card. It was just not good in most of its decks that it was being put. I'm sure that there were amazing Seedglaive Mentor decks, and I'm sure that there were. I mean, I've been killed by Lagorin several times in the deck that was well suited and had a good draw against me, and I didn't align very well with my removal and interaction against it, for example. So the fact that the card is generally not great doesn't mean it's always not great. There will be great homes for most of the cards. But then we have those cards that people fell into as traps, but we also had surprising overperformers, cards that nobody was betting on, and yet they delivered. And we can also speculate, because why not, why those cards were sort of undervalued. And here I have a graph of all the number 1 cards in the colors and the multicolors from the sets that I looked at. And you can see these are like Molten Exhale. 180 people figure out that Molten Exhale is going to be good. Clap, clap, clap. Bravo. You made it. Scorching Dragonfire, Caustic Exhale, Take Out the Trash. Like top four of the most popular cards selected that and ended up being the best cards in their color. Removal and a bunch of them in red. And then Sipsic Appraiser. People knew that Sipsic Appraiser looks good. Burst Lightning, another removal. Savor, Bride's End, another removal. Trapped in the Screen, another removal. Pond Prophet, multicolor common. Stampeding Scaryfoot. That was actually surprising. I was so happy with my Stampeding Scaryfoot guest as a top green common, and it turns out that everyone predicted it on top of me. So yeah, fun. So these ones were sort of like most of the people figured them out. As you can see, removal, probably because people, if they don't know what will be the best card in the set, they would just pick a removal spell. But we have a bunch of cards that only few people selected. And don't worry, this graph is very, very small. It's there to depict you the range of how many people guessed the best card in each color combination, color and multicolor cards. I'm gonna zoom in to the end of that with the winner of everything, Thundering Broodwagon, that only one person picked, and turned out that it was the best multicolor card in Ether Drift. Now, I don't know why only one person guessed it. I mean, clearly it wasn't me. There were maybe a bunch of those multicolor cards, and some of them looked more appealing. I don't remember what I selected in that set actually, but it was definitely not Thundering Broodwagon. Yeah, maybe they were guessing some of the Simic cards or whatever. There's some Is It cards look good, like there's the Broadside Barrage, for example. So maybe those cards attracted much more guessing. But yeah, Thundering Broodwagon is a 6-drop, and it's hard to guess a 6-drop. People err on the side of cheaper cards because cheaper cards are more likely to have impact on the game. But yeah, this is like a 6/5 Menace Reach vehicle. Okay. It destroys something when it enters, and it got cycling, and there's reanimation in the set. But I think, turned out exceeding everyone's expectations. I think people were giving it like a C minus, whatever, D plus even in the set reviews. Turned out to be much better than that. Only two people predicted that Bite Down on Crime will be the best green common in Murders at Karlov Manor. Again, 4-mana spell, and maybe people underappreciated how often you're going to cast it for discounted mana. And I'm wondering now, if it costs 1 more mana and you get 3 mana discount for casting it with the Collective Evidence, will we be playing it in Constructed because it triggers the Beanstalk? Anyway, it's a bite spell, but gives +2/+0 to the creature that will be doing the biting. It turned out much better than people expected. I do remember thinking about that card in the previous season, and I was like, "Oof, it's tough if that card is even going to be playable, or is it going to be great?" And I ended up with mediocre, and then guess what? I was disappointed. Then we have Engine Rat. Only 4 people guessed that Engine Rat is going to be a top black common. And also you can see why. There was a bunch of really good black commons in that set. And to be fair, Engine Rat pipped the competition by a very narrow fraction. So, it probably depends of from which week did from which day did I take the data, and maybe Pagdol Terror would be the top black uncommon, or maybe Wicker Folk 1/3 Surveyor will be better. So here it was a very, very tough call between 4 cards, but of those 4 cards, the new Murder That Kills Vehicles, again, I forgot the name, I'm sorry, probably got like the bulk of the vote. In the end, for the game, it didn't make a big of a difference because the win rates of those cards were so similar. But still, kudos to the people that guessed the Engine Rat because it showed spin out. Thank you. Because the people that guessed the Engine Rat showed that they were not afraid of making a bold choice and were rewarded for that. Next one we have is the Dreadwing Scavenger. Only 4 people guessed that it's going to be the best uncommon, signpost uncommon in Foundations. And I thought for a second when I was evaluating it, I thought, am I crazy, or is this thing really, really strong? And it turns out it was really, really strong. 3 mana 2/2 flyer. When it enters or attacks, draw a card and discard a card. The fact that it does it already at the enters is the reason why it was so powerful, because you already got the loot. Whatever comes after is gravy, but you already got some card selection. So if they use the removal on that, they use the removal on that probably of equal mana than you spend on it, and you got your loot for free. Now, if they don't, you get another loot. You're getting all of a sudden way ahead. And also, there were some cards that were synergistic with drawing multiple cards a turn, which it allowed you to do it. And if you had Threshold, which with looting a lot would be happening, it became a 3/3 flyer. And 3/3 flyer for 3 is a good deal. Sometimes you cast it and it already was a 3/3. So yeah, a card turned out to be great, but it sort of flew under the radar when people were evaluating the cards for Foundations. Similar situation with Midnight Mayhem. 4 mana for making 3/1/1 red gremlin creature tokens, and gremlins you control gain menace, lifelink, and haste until end of turn. And we've seen how powerful was the Mardu Monument in the recent set. And there's lots of similarities between Midnight Mayhem and Mardu Monument. And again, I'm pretty sure that despite the Midnight Mayhem being such a powerful card in Duskmourn, people were still surprised that Mardu Monument was a great card, despite knowing it. But turns out that making those multiple bodies, being able to generate a massive board even for a turn, and then trying to capitalize on that is a great skill. And the lifelink on those stupid gremlins has ruined many of my plans when I was thinking, okay, I'm racing and I might win this race. And then they cast Midnight Mayhem and I'm not winning that race because they gained this stupid 3 life. Shame. Or maybe even more if you had some gremlins lying around, which was not impossible. And I think that, yeah, this sort of like tricks you. If this was maybe a 4 mana creature that is a 3/3 haste and you gain 3 life when it enters, maybe people would evaluate it higher. And this is clearly better than the card that I just described. But because it's a spell, maybe we don't make that connection that, okay, it's a creature actually. And I think that this is something that you should probably work on when you're evaluating cards. Think about creature making spells as creatures. Dazzling Angel. Here we also maybe fell into a trap for the evaluation. It's a 3 mana 3/2/3 flying angel, and when another creature you control enters, you gain 1 life. This is not that different from Lunarch Veteran that I mentioned before in the top 25 commons of the last 3 years, in a way that it's impossible to race against this card because you're going to gain at least 4 or 5 life out of it. And actually, what me didn't notice, and me including, was that 2/3 body with flying for 3 mana is probably just okay on rate. And if you tag along that gain 1 life for every creature that you control enters on top of it, it becomes just a great plus. And I think that sometimes it's hard to click because we've been having like this string of like mediocre 2/3 flying creatures in blue in the recent years, and they all sucked, to be fair, but they did not have that gain 1 life ability that this one has. They had much more mediocre abilities on them. If they had something better, we would have noticed. So it's very close between card being poor and being great based on those additional abilities that they have. So you need to start thinking about, if you're looking at this card and you know that, okay, this power and toughness for this mana can cover a wide range of of grades. Start thinking about the ability more thoroughly and think about it. Can it be a great ability? If it can be a great ability, then it can be a great card potentially. So try to think about the abilities. And this is another example where not thinking about ability made people misevaluate a card. Thunderhead Gunner, like 5 mana for a 4/5 reach, is not great. I wouldn't pay for like French vanilla 5 mana 4/5 reach. I wouldn't want to have it in my deck. But the ability to discard a card once each turn to draw a card, now that's just sick. This is a super good filtering ability. Remember the Oblivious Bookworm in Duskmourn? Yes, it could draw cards occasionally, but it was still super strong as a free looter that you don't need to tap. That this one even has summoning sickness. Looters are great if you can do that for free, and this is a free looter, even freer than the looter because they can still block while looting. So if we thought a bit more about that ability, and I have to say I thought about it, and I was close of picking that card in my list, but I chickened out because in the end I just like thought, oh, it's a clunky 5-drop. Turned out it was amazingly important, and then I was super happy having like 2 copies of that. I didn't even go to any kind of red blue deck without having at least a couple of copy of that. That was a necessary condition for me to start drafting any kind of discard deck. Okay, Extract the Confession is another, I think, card that was not evaluated by many based on the historical ramifications of edicts. We hear time and time again, edicts not great in limited because they will always have some kind of small creature lying around that they can sacrifice at will. But Extract the Confession is not really an edict. Yes, if you cast it for the face value, it's just an edict. And you know what? Sometimes you will, but also sometimes an edict will be great. You're playing against an aggressive deck, you don't have a 2-drop, they cast their 2-drop, you cast Extract the Confession, boom. You neutralize their first turn for the same amount of mana. But the problem is that you draw an edict in turn 9, turn 12, and it doesn't do anything because you cast it and they sacrifice a 1/1/01 plant token that they had lying around. No one cares about it. But Extract the Confession is good late in the game because you can collect evidence, and then instead of sacrificing any creature, they have to sacrifice the creature with the greatest power among the creatures they control. So it is a good removal all of a sudden now in the late game. So this card looks like an edict, but actually covers the weakest spot of the edicts. Not turn 2, but turn 7, turn 9, turn 11. It becomes a good card then because most of the time you will have some evidence that you can collect, and then you kill their best creature, or biggest at least. And I think that this is the sort of like looking at the first line of the text of the card and not reading the small print to properly evaluate the power of the card, because we do know that those edicts that they are forced to sacrifice creature with the highest power or highest toughness are actually not bad. They are usually like C+ to B- kind of level card when they print them at uncommon, and this was it at common with some hoops. Also, the set had a lot of big creatures that you could kill with those. Then we have the Purging Stormbrood. That was counted as a black uncommon, and I think that the issue there was that just black uncommons in the Darkir Dragonstorm were not that powerful, and Purging Stormbrood came out on top of that, and maybe people didn't figure even out that in this particular set it counted as a pure black card. They were expecting it's a multicolor, so it might be some technicality that made it so popular. Person of Interest, though, now that card, I don't know how it flew so much under the radar. And it happened a couple of times that this card was printed and people didn't evaluate it very, very well. But 4 mana to make 2/2/2s is just a good rate for a red creature, especially. And I think that people didn't assess it as such. And maybe there were a couple of cards that looked like much more appealing red cards to select. It turned out the Person of Interest was the best of the bunch of red cards in the set, but it was not by far. So maybe here we have the proximity issue, that people didn't evaluate it as highly as they thought, and at the same time they saw some other cards that they found appealing, and selected those. I don't think there was a big win rate difference between person of interest and the second and third best red common in Murders at Karlov Manor. But then we have a card that definitely very few people predicted is going to be good. Refute. 1 blue for a counter spell, draw a card and discard a card. So basically counter spell with loot. And adding loot to a counter is just so great, because yes, you had to do nothing on your turn, leave the 3 mana open, and then at least when you counter something, because you're forced to, because they play some spell into the counter spell, checking if you're bluffing that you had a counter, getting that loot from that was such a big difference. And this is, again, cancel is not a great card. You add a bit on cancel, it becomes a great card. You add a bit more, like what was this? Chat, you're so good today with the names. What was the spree card from OTJ? 3 wishes, 3 something. I'm sure we're gonna get it in a second in chat. 3 steps ahead. There you go. They are definitely 3 steps ahead of me. Then you have an amazing card. So very, very small additions can turn a card from not playable to really, really good to an incredible, while maintaining the same kind of thing. Okay, and the last one that we have on the list, Miriam the Herd Whisperer. I do not know why this card was so under the radar. I actually was pretty high on it since day one of the format. And 2 mana 3/2 is solid stat line. The fact that it wants to play mounts and vehicles is good for that card, because a 3/2 on turn 2 is amazing when opponent doesn't have blockers. Once they have blockers, it becomes problematic, because you can't do anything with it. It doesn't block very well. It doesn't attack very well. Well, Miriam does one thing very well, and it's crewing things. It can crew most of the mounts in the set, and of course it gives them bonus, and it gives them hexproof. So on your turn, so you are unlikely to be blown out of the water by whatever removal spell that they have for your mount. So it will generate value. And maybe the fact that the 2 mana 3/2, I'm actually probably I'm generally overvaluing the 2 mana 3/2s. I come from the era where 2 mana 3/2, that must be busted. What is the downside? Yeah, lots of people picked up the shark that bounces over the refute. By the way, responding to the chat comment, what did people pick in foundations over the refute? It was the shark. Yeah, I think that sometimes it's good to think about what makes you evaluate the card lower be somehow overcome in the set. Like, I think that lots of people will worry that 3/2 is not good enough for 2 mana. But then I would like to refer you back to the Bloodtide Harvester, one of the most banger cards in Limited in recent years. That is also a 2 mana 3/2, because it generates value. And if it stops attacking, it will kill something. And it produces that blood that you can use to get more resources, whatever. All those things make it useful in the later game. So look at the usefulness of those cards that you think that might be outsized across the game. Look at the ways that those drawbacks in sizing might be overcome in the late game. And when you're evaluating, think about those things. So hopefully that will help you make sure that you pick exactly the right 3/2 card for 2 mana, or a 2/2 for 2 mana that can scale with the game. All right, that is the list. And I guess that to end, the general trends is that so far in the recent years, WotC prints great white cards, but not so great green cards. Black and red, they do have good non-creature spells at common, so keep an eye on those, because it's probably a removal. At uncommon, the signposts are pretty strong, so watch those cards. At rare, the spells are disproportionately weak, and generally, spells at higher rarities are disproportionately weak compared to the creatures. Yeah, one-drop creatures in recent years are amazing, but if you have something that costs more than 6 mana or 6 mana or more, look at spells rather than creatures, because most of the time 6 mana creatures are not what you want to be looking for. Uncommon 2-drops creatures are pretty strong, so take a look at those when you're evaluating. Rares, non-creature spells, focus on the more expensive ones. The cheaper ones are usually constructed plants or traps of some sort. Mythic 5-drops, sweet spot where the power is located. Almost guaranteed that they're going to be busted, or at least very, very, very solid. And then Wisdom of the Crowd generically is not bad, but it has its spots of where it misses the things, and lots of those misses are based on evaluating the cards that we know, because it's harder to approach them freshly. You applied the previous knowledge rather than focusing on the current context. And yeah, there's plenty of reasons why we miss cards quality, and I hopefully covered some of them. But okay, with that, I'd like to thank the 17 lands, because I wouldn't really be able to do that. I would also like to thank the MTG DS for the help with getting the data from the Pack 0 Pick 1. And thanks to Fake J Brown, who is, as always, my guardian angel. And I will still continue thanking him, even though he's not doing anything currently. But he made this awesome logo, so that guarantees him immortality in the stream. And with that, I'll see you next week, where I will assemble some people. Let's call them a crew. I will build some skeletons with that crew, and we're going to do the skeleton crew of the Final Fantasy to try to figure out what our card evaluations are for this new set. And with that, I'll see you next week.